Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, we do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to bring you today's educational event. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. And the presenter will answer those questions during or after the webinar today as appropriate. One more thing, if we have not had time to get to your question during the webinar, please go ahead and leave your phone number as well. We will reach out to you after today's event to make sure that that question gets addressed. Once again, we want this experience to be as educational as possible. Please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I would love to introduce you to today's presenter. Sean McElderry is the CEO and founder of Monarch Wealth and Retirement Strategies. He is a certified financial fiduciary and has over 22 years of experience in the financial services industry. As financial professionals, Sean and his team are committed to helping people create solutions for their retirement assets. Once they understand your work risk tolerance, time horizon, and goals, they work to develop a program that carefully balances investment strategies with preserving principal. And Sean, I'm excited to have you here today. And it's a great topic. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you. And we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Marche, and appreciate everyone joining us today. Welcome. We all live in this new world of webinars now, and hopefully in person sometimes, but appreciate you coming. And so, yeah, this is a topic that we spend a lot of time on with clients and people looking to see where they're heading in the next couple of years or maybe further out, depending on where you are at in your career. So I'll kind of cover a variety of some misconceptions and kind of just give you some ideas on the boundaries of knowing how and when you can retire and have a roadmap. I think that would really be the key to today's talk is, having a plan in place that you're confident with. And I'd say the biggest thing that we find with people is this fear of just having the conversation and thinking they're not prepared. So I think what's really key is, and where we come from with our clients is, and what I always hope for is after the conversation is people say, I feel better. I just really feel like I have a better grasp of what's going on and what I'm doing. And that's really our goal in this topic is to have a plan. This is probably the most important thing. How do I know the optimal time to retire from my job? So we work with a lot of people that are self-employed to a lot of people that are, dealing with Fortune 500 companies where they have a big sophisticated plan that oftentimes they don't understand. And I'd say probably what gets in the way more often than not is people talk to each other at their companies. And it's this kind of, game of phone that you've all had when you were a kid where the story changes and unfolds. And, really everyone kind of gets these ideas. They talk to their manager. The manager gives them this really serious talk about this is what you've got to do. And I've always joked that same manager I'm talking to the next day has no clue what they're doing. They're completely off the rails, giving bad advice to people because they don't even know their own plan, let alone giving advice. So be really careful who you talk to. Also family. We have a lot of people that will tell us that their father or their father-in-law has this whole strategy. But again, we're from different times with different solutions. When my parents were growing up, they didn't have 401ks and pension plans so much back then. It was, you were lucky to have some shares of Like my grandfather had Sears Roebuck stock. And when he retired, he had to have his house paid off, right? Because if he didn't, he was living on Social Security. So they didn't have the types of assets we do today. The average household in this country has about 55,000 combined over 55. That's the average. So if you're doing much better than that, you're in a really good place, because most people in this country don't have tons of savings that they can fall back on. So as far as the optimal time, we'll talk about that today. But what it really comes down to is having an understanding of what your cash flow is. So this is a big one. Do I need to wait to retire at 65, or could leaving sooner actually help? So there's a couple moving parts to this. I think a lot of people in general have had it kind of programmed into them that the longer and harder we work, we put our head down and we focus on the goal. And somehow this age 65 became that number. But does it mean that retirement could maybe be defined differently? We find that many of the plans that we see with different companies out there, and we work with many, AT&T, Verizon, Frontier, Kaiser, Northrop, Boeing, all of the major entertainment industries, NBC, ABC. We've covered many different companies that have all varieties of plans. And what we see typically is there's usually a set of parameters of what you need to be pension eligible. So whether you have an annuity from the company or the option of annuity and a lump sum, especially, those plans are going to usually have an age that determines when to go. And quite often, leaving in your early 50s to even mid 50s is very viable, because these plans are not just based on age, but based on tenure. So we can get really into the weeds on this topic, but I'll give you an example. We have many clients that will come to us and say, hey, I'm 53, 54 years old. I'm going to retire. We usually hear numbers like 59 and a half, 62, 65. We have people tell us when they die, they will retire. Okay. So whatever your time frame is, your head is, what I would suggest is have someone that's knowledgeable in your plan look under the hood and help you determine what makes sense. Because one of the things a lot of people don't understand about these plans is you'll hear oftentimes people talk about age penalties from your company plan. So you think, well, gee, because I'm young, I'm getting an age penalty. So I'll kind of explain this as simple as I can. The reason that these company plans put an age penalty in, especially if you have a lump sum option, which is where you can cash out and walk away with a big chunk of money and it goes tax-free, rolled over into an IRA. If you have that kind of plan, they are definitely age-based. And when they calculate how much you get, they have to pay you more under the ERISA laws the younger you are, because it's based on your life expectancy. So what a lot of people aren't aware of is a 50-year-old with 30 years of service would get more money than a 70-year-old with 30 years of service, simply because they're expected to live much longer because they're so much younger. So what the companies do is they enact these kind of age penalties to try to offset that, but they're minimally offsetting things. They're only able to offset a little bit. So if you have an early out buyout or some kind of an incentive to go where they're throwing money at you, or they might even enhance your years of service, okay, that paired up with some other things going on in the economy right now, and again, this is something we could talk about for probably 2 hours, but I'll keep it brief, is interest rates being at almost near all-time lows right now is the second factor that determines a pension lump sum. So anyone that gets that pension lump sum that's lucky enough to have that, it pays to be young, and in a world with low interest rates, assuming you're retirement eligible now, that's how you get the most money out in some cases. So what we find a lot of people is they kind of fixate on a date, 65, 59 and a half, whatever that age is, and they don't look at anything. So all I'm suggesting is talk to someone that knows your plan, not your HR. Talk to an advisor that can really get in there. And we'll talk more in detail on that. But that's the basic concept, is you've got to know what your plan has in it. And we can literally run numbers to show you this is what it has today versus a point in the future. Now, one last thing before we move on is people go in there and calculate their numbers. They'll look at it what it is right now. If the lump sum's involved, because we're at 120-year low on interest rates, it pumps up your lump sum by 10% on average for every 1% interest rates have dropped. So when you hear of low mortgages, think that means you get more money on your pension. If you can get a cheap mortgage, you're going to get more money if you have a lump sum. So if you calculate your numbers today and your pension was $500,000, let's say, and you say, well, I'm going to stay till I'm 57, I'm 55 now, I'm going to wait a couple more years. What happens if interest rates go up 2%? Well, you'll make a little bit up on your pension because you worked, but you're going to lose about 20% or 10% for every 1% rise in interest rates. So your 500 grand would drop 20% by staying 2 years if rates were 2% higher in 2 years. So this is where we find a lot of people, they'll pass up really nice incentive plans when they're 55 years old or even younger, thinking, well, I'm just going to get more later. That's not always the case. So this is another topic, how to replace your paycheck. This is really what we're all trying to do. And there's a few ways to think about this too. Hinging off that last slide of should I retire at 65, another thing you might think about is does it make sense to transition? You're either transitioning to retirement or you possibly are transitioning to a second job. Or in some cases, I have many of my employees that will retire from their current job and then contract back. So you know your industry better than I do, but that happens quite often with the telecoms, the aerospace, the healthcare. They will leave their job. Now they've got all this experience. And so then what they'll do is they'll take their money off the table while it's an ideal time, knowing that maybe they can or can't replace their entire paycheck, and basically get that money invested. So here's a good example of that. And this kind of goes maybe just before this slide, so I'll just kind of insert this before we go into the replacing paycheck. But let's say that you retired at 50 because you had all your points and you got a $500,000 off the table. But thank you, Marche. So let's say you waited to retire or you left sooner. If you left at 50, you got your money off the table and you actually found another job. You went out, pounded the pavement, replaced your paycheck on your own, knowing that $500,000 you can invest. Well, I don't want to quote timeframes, but if you were able to earn about 7% on your money, by the time you'd be 60, your $500,000 would be worth about $1 million now. I can almost promise you that if you were to go into your pension calculator and even left the interest rates alone, didn't mess with them, your pension would not be worth $1 million at 60 if you stayed for 10 more years. So people will always say to me, well, why the heck would I leave my job only to go get another job and maybe get paid less? And then I got to deal with a new boss, less vacation. Well, those are all valid arguments, but it comes down to kind of your place in life. We have many clients that want to move out of state, sell their house while it's up right now, take their money off the table. So then getting to the next slide, Marche, can you replace your paycheck? We can set up kind of a roadmap now of, okay, what if I need all my paycheck? What if I need part of it? What if I got part of it and grew my assets more and made a little bit of money? At the end of the day, what most of my clients want is how do I wake up in 10 years and I'm financially in the best place? They want to know that they're solid, that they couldn't have turned back and said, if I had only done this differently. So replacing the paycheck, let's say you're putting into your bank account $2,000 every 2 weeks. Then you need, a little over $48,000 a year. You're probably at about $52,000 with the extra pay period. Okay. But you might be making 80 or 90,000 or even 100,000 to net that. So our first focus is what is your net pay required? So before you talk to a financial advisor, always look at what do you get paid every 2 weeks? And is there anything weird coming out of there? Like you have some car payment being drafted out of your check. We have certain people that have things set up with a credit union. So just kind of look and double check. That number is where we start. So we use that number along with how much you have in assets. And then the last piece that's usually a big component is your mortgage. The mortgage is really important. We don't need a lot of information. Just what do you owe? Are you going to stay there? What's your interest rate? And how many years left do you have on the loan? Now, why that's important is because your paycheck, your living expenses to replace is going to slowly rise through the years. Assuming you stay in your home, that will be a cost that is consistently flat. It's not going to go up unless you move. And it's eventually going to go away. So that can have a dramatic effect on how your numbers look when you're doing a plan. A lot of people forget to put that in. So we do an in-depth look through all the different pieces of what you have basically to build a cash flow analysis.
And would you say that all financial advisors offer a cash flow analysis for retirement or going towards retirement, or is that talk a little bit about about that question there?
That's actually a great point. So in my career, I started out with a big focus on retirement planning, and what I've seen, I would say the majority of the time, like probably 90% of the time, is most advisors don't retire a lot of people. They kind of do a lot of everything, and retirement planning isn't necessarily the focus. What I would warn against is a lot of advisors will claim they're retirement specialists, but may only retire a handful of people in a calendar year. We retire several people a week because that's where we live. So cash flow analysis and using a sophisticated plan is very important, and most advisors don't. We call them yellow pad planners, where you sit with them, or maybe you Zoom with them now, and they pull out a yellow pad and they ask you a handful of questions. They pull out their calculator for 30 or 40 seconds and they say, nope, you can't retire. Or they tell them to retire. Then they'll meet with us and they'll tell us what went on with some other advisor very often. And a good example of this, we had a gentleman that was having some health issues. He has his points. He's able to retire. He's younger. He's only 51 years old. His advisor of many years, who he trusted and really appreciated working with, told him under no uncertain terms could he retire. There was no way this was going to work. He had to stay at least till he was 55. So I started asking him some questions. We ran a plan. His numbers looked so stellar that it's probably one of the best plans I've run in a month. And after the conversation, his wife ended up getting on a call with us, and they're literally packing probably this week and moving to Tennessee. And he said the conversation with his old advisor was pretty simple. The gentleman said, oh, I guess I kind of screwed that up. But they did no plan. And so it's very common, Marche, that advisors don't do this. It doesn't take us a ton of time, but I think one of the reasons is we have to pay for the software, which is one aspect of why I think they don't use it. We use eMoney. You can Google eMoney all day. They are fantastic. eMoney was developed by a couple of financial advisors that felt like there was a big gaping hole in planning on getting something on paper for you. The beauty of eMoney is when we run the plan for you, if any advisor that has eMoney can do this, is basically it's a living, breathing plan. We plug all your data in. You can pull in other accounts, personal things, and eMoney will then have a direct feed with all your stuff constantly updating. So it's the type of thing where you can go in and check, how do I look, now? What happens if we do this? They have little, very simple tools where you can say, hey, my spouse really wants a convertible. Can we afford it? You plug it in, and it now says, oh, instead of you dying with $1 million, you're going to die with 900,000. So that was an expensive convertible, right? So it's those types of things that we can do on the fly projections, and you can kind of see how things affect you. And we help you with all this. That's what the advisor is supposed to be doing, is getting you a plan and also kind of putting a pressure test on it. So when you say, can I replace my paycheck, you're also saying, can I get cost of living adjustments? Is my money going to last? And then the big question is, what are the odds that you're wrong? What are the odds that this won't work? So we use something called Monte Carlo simulation, which is a very fancy way of saying we do like a heart test on your money. If you ever had a heart test, the doctor says you got to go run on a treadmill and we hook you up. We're going to do that on your portfolio. And we basically, my goal is to get it to where I say, this is where you're living at 90+% certainty. But we have some clients that are like, look, I want to spend my money when I'm young. And I want to know, how is the plan to spend as much as possible, but also still be able to pay my bills through retirement? We can do that too. So whether you want to die with $10 million because your kids really need it, or whether you want to die and literally on your last day you have zero, we can calculate that into replacing your paycheck, how that works. Is working longer hurting me or helping me? So this is an interesting thing. There was a study done actually in the aerospace industry a number of years ago. You could probably Google it. It's still around. Is that for every day you work past 50, I'm blanking now, it's either 50 or 55, it takes 2 years off your life expectancy. And they did a study of every employee in the aerospace industry, which is probably well over a couple million employees between Raytheon and Boeing and Northrop and all these big aerospace. They found that the average expectancy of an engineer or employee retiring at 65 was like literally less than 5 years. So, working, we as Americans, I think in general, we work harder than many people. And it's something to really consider, because what are we working for, right? We're all working to collect a paycheck and to build these benefits. But then the question is, if you've reached that point where you have the bulk of what you're going to get, and we could actually start to put it in reverse, where now all that hard work and savings, and I always find that the people that are the most worried about this are the ones that plan the best. They're not the ones with thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and they're up to their eyeballs, as they say, in credit card debt. They're usually the ones that look pretty good on paper. And so we actually have to convince them, hey, you can go start enjoying the money. And a big conversation we have with our clients is it's all about thriving a little bit. So you might actually want to take some vacations now and put that into your plan. So think about, what do you want to do in retirement? So when you come to a retirement planner, we are, of course, talking about, can you replace your paycheck? But we also want to know, what is my flexibility in terms of, not being stuck just staring at four walls and hoping that I don't have some type of crisis down the line that blows up my account. So working longer, yes, you can lose money on your pension lump sums. You can also, and I'm a firm believer that collecting Social Security too late, not necessarily best for everybody. We have to look at the individual. It's all about that conversation. What is the longevity of your family? What is your health like? You know your health better than I do. If you literally know that you have 8 health problems going on and you think you're going to be lucky to make it to 85, well, then you might want to start collecting social at 62. Get it while it's there, because you're going to collect about $80,000 on the front end, roughly. So how long is it going to take to get that $80,000 back if you collect at 66 and change, or whenever your full retirement age is? So working longer, pressing on is great, but I would say really consider having a talk about, what is my financial position now? What's my financial health look like? And does it make sense to keep working, or should I start, going off and finding the next stage of my life? And what would I do next? Or would I start a second career? If a second career is something you'd want to do, it's much smarter to do at 50 than it is to try to do at 60. Because your odds of getting hired at that second job are way better at 50. Once you get over 50 and you start getting into the 50 plus range, it's going to get harder and harder to find the second career. I have many clients who have been able to go out, retire from the phone company, or, working in film and television, and they go do a whole other job. Maybe they want to be a teacher, and they get a pension from the city or the state after 10 years. So you could do that too. So now a lot of people say, well, this is great, but how the heck am I going to retire at 50 or at 55? I thought I couldn't touch my money. So that may have got your brain hung up. We might want to move that slide to the beginning even, Marche, because it's one of those things. But so there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I can't give you every single answer, but there's a few things. Your 401k, most companies have a provision. It's called post-55 withdrawals. Okay. We could make a lot of jokes about that one, but post-55 withdrawals means if you separate from your company the year you turn 55, okay, so you could literally turn 55 in December of 2022 on the last day of the year. You could still leave January of 2022. And if your 401k authorizes that provision, which is a quick phone call to check, this is the type of stuff when I say you've got to call and ask questions. Anything in your 401k will be penalty free upon retiring if you turn 55 the year you separate. So imagine someone with $500,000 in their pension and maybe 300 or 400 grand in their 401k, and they need X amount per month. We run the cash flow analysis and they say, you know, Sean, I want to go work for my uncle. He's been trying to get me to run his sandwich shop and he's going to pay me 30 grand a year. And I just need enough to cover my mortgage and I want to get the heck out of this company. I've had it. You would leave your 401k or a portion behind, and then we would set up a withdrawal stream from there. Now, this is where you have to make sure you're working with the correct planner, because if that person or that planner doesn't understand these rules, and I promise you many don't, they want to get your money and invest it, because we don't get paid to leave it at Fidelity or Vanguard or what have you. We get paid to roll it into an IRA and help you directly. Once they pull it out of that plan for you, you no longer have that exception. Okay, and that's a super flexible exception. So if you're anywhere north of 55 to 59 and a half and you have money in a 401k, that can be a bridge to get you there. Okay, penalty free. So you're just paying ordinary income tax. And the fun thing is, most people making anywhere between 50 to 100 grand when they retire, I would say the bulk of our clients only pay 10% federal to 15%, with maybe 0 to 5% state. So you got to remember, you're not paying Medicare, FICA, you're not holding in 401ks, all that goes away. So you're going to be in a much more simple tax bracket. And for those of us that don't like paying taxes, I promise you, your taxes in retirement, even you could even argue with penalties, you will be paying the government less than when you're working in many cases. So that's kind of a whole nother conversation. But so let's say you're 50 and similar situation. You've got $1 million. You want to go do something different. I know a lot of my telecom folks, they want to retire and contract back. So there's an exception called 72T. It's also known as substantially equal periodic payments. And it's very simple. We plug in how much money you have in assets. We don't have to start it right away. We can start it a year into retirement. You can start it right away. You could do part of it. But essentially what happens is there's a formula involved that says if you have X amount of money and you're a certain age, you can draw out so much per year with no state or federal penalties. So what's the caveat? Well, once you set that 72T up, you have to let it run the greater of 5 years or until you're 59 and a half. So if you're 50 and you said, hey, I want to take $2,000 a month out, no penalties, you would have to let that keep going till 59 and a half. Now, let's say that you needed more money. Well, depending on how much you have, we have many clients that don't need to earmark their entire nest egg towards what they need. So we would partition the account, just think buckets. I know everyone likes to talk about buckets. So you have one bucket that's earmarked towards your 72T, and you have another bucket that is an emergency account, if you will. Could be a second stream for a 72T in a year or two. It could be just you need to pull a chunk out with penalties. It could be you need to pull a penalty-free out down payment for a house or for educational costs. That's where we have a lot of conversations about how does this work for you and what is the best strategy to go in place. I can tell you that if the client has the appropriate amount in savings, we've never been able to not make that work to where we can come up with some kind of strategy. There's always a way around it, but we always want to have emergency accounts with a chunk you can draw from. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. This is not something that is widely understood. Now, the warning here, and I will say on 72Ts, if you get audited, okay, you're the one that the IRS is going to be talking to, not your financial advisor. You have to deal with someone that just doesn't go, oh, yeah, we can do that. I've done it a couple times, or I've never done it before, or there's a big pause and you realize they're digging through Google really quick to see what the heck you're talking about. Don't do that. Go with someone that's done this. I've literally done this hundreds of times for people because they're not going to audit your advisor. They're going to audit you. That's the thing. It's not hard to do. You just have to know all the moving parts and also make sure you don't get trapped doing something that is not giving you the flexibility you need. And so that's really important. The one question that people always ask me about this is, okay, Sean, so I leave at 50. You're going to get me a couple grand a month. But what if my dream job falls out of the sky and now I'm making 200 a year, or I win the lotto, or I move to Costa Rica and I just don't need it? Okay. Very simple. You can stop. You will just owe them the penalties for as much as you've taken. So you would preferably try to do this in the first couple of years so that your penalty is nominal. But you wouldn't want to stop this if you started at 50 and you were now 58 and got some great job. You would just let the money come in, and then we would reinvest it, maybe even offset some taxes a different way. But everyone always wants to think, oh, I'm going to get creative and reinvest it and just take the money. Well, yes, but you're raising your tax brackets for 5, 6, 7 years doing that. It's better to stop, eat the penalty, and then maybe do a 72T later if you need it again, if it's early on. So I think that covers that pretty good.
All right. I did have a couple questions come in and I wanted to ask you those before we get too much further.
Okay.
This one's about traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. Can you convert a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA and not be working?
If you choose to convert it, you could be doing it when you're not working. They're changing a lot of rules on that. So I'd probably want to have a conversation one-on-one, but you could definitely convert it. And I'd say the Roth conversion thing, I would also be careful with, because many people do this thinking they're getting super creative and they're gonna protect themselves from taxes down the line. And I think the truth is this has been a very heavily marketed thing, especially online. You'll see things about converting your IRA to save taxes down the line. But as I mentioned earlier, most of our clients pay so little in taxes in retirement that you might want to think about that before you get hit with a huge tax bill. So we can do an analysis for people, have an advisor run an analysis before you do it, and even talk to your CPA to really make sure it makes sense.
And we have one other question here that fits in with what we're talking. And I know there might be a couple more other questions coming in. And don't worry, folks, I see them and I will try to address as many as we can during our question and answer time. But when you were talking about cash flow, what about if you have children that are going to college? Is that something that you're calculating also if they want to help pay for college for children?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the biggest things that I find when people think about retiring is, we'll be talking to them on the phone or in person, and they'll tell us, well, I'm not leaving because. And the big ones that come up is children, college, a wedding coming, healthcare concerns. There's all these things that come up. So the simple way to think about it is the whole purpose of running a cash flow analysis, we're trying to replace your paycheck. So if you're making $5,000 a month today, and we can replace your $5,000, your goals that are already in place, if you're making the same as you were working, then if you could afford it when you were working, theoretically, you should be okay to be able to handle those challenges in retirement. So, but we can put in anything from college to you need another car to you're moving, you're changing houses. We can literally plug in any goal or costs that you have coming down the line, inheritance that you may expect, anything like that, definitely.
All right. I think we'll save some of these other questions until a little later.
Okay. All right. So steps to a financial checkup. This is pretty simple. I think that, really what's important is, a financial advisor is not supposed to be this person that you talk to once, throw a bunch of money in, and then either don't hear from again or hear from once a year to check in. I see it a lot differently. It's a relationship where we get to know people on a level that we understand kind of what they're trying to do. And it can't just be about what we're going to stick their money in. That's quite frankly, the easy part. The hard part is aligning your tax considerations, We can bring CPAs in and CFPs in that can help make sure that your taxes are being done effectively, as efficient, and paying as little as possible. Also, are your estate plans set up? Do you have a living trust? Do you need one? Did you do this years ago and don't know if it's good? We have estate planners that will check it for you and tell you, hey, this looks great, or you might want to redo this or amend it with the person that did it for you. So we're going to bring in whatever professional. We have professionals that we've been working with that are trusted partners that really can help come from every angle. And this is a big problem in our industry, is the financial advisors don't talk to the CPAs and the tax people. They don't talk to the estate planning attorneys. They're not talking to your lender. My clients, we're helping them get their loans done. We're talking to the lender, the real estate agents. So anytime you have a transition is when you should have a financial checkup. So think, if there's money involved, you're making a big purchase, you're moving, you're selling a business, buying a business, retiring, changing jobs. Even changing jobs, there's a lot of things to talk about. What do we do with those old 401ks? So part of the checkup is just having kind of an inventory of everything you have. From simply is your tax forms from last year, a mortgage statement, maybe a paycheck stub, and what accounts you have. I have a client the other day that we literally spent a month gathering the enormity of accounts that she had in all these different places, all these little accounts between her and her husband. So just basically getting all that together is what you need to do. As far as talking to an advisor, whoever you talk to, ask a lot of questions about like what their process is, what they do, what types of people they help, what is an ideal client for them. When you're going to be talking to an expert, if you're talking to someone that only deals with doctors, and that's literally like what they specialize in, that might not be your person if you're not a doctor. So ask them, what is your ideal client? So when you're trying to talk to someone and thinking about a second career, or you're thinking about getting a plan, just really ask them, like, who do they like helping? What is their ideal client? I think that's key. When you work with an advisor, I think like anything in life, what you put into it is what you're going to get out. And I think people, I've always had a very good ability to help kind of keep people moving through the process to get their info. But for some people, talking about money isn't something they do. They don't, even spouses have a hard time. We are really good at helping kind of help you gather the information. And also, you want an advisor that's going to be able to bring your spouse together. This is not time to start, arguing about who pays the bills and this types of things. It's how do we bring the couple together to see things from a different light. And I will tell you, a good financial planner should be able to help get a couple on a better page, because it suddenly changes the conversation. Maybe one spouse is super good at finances and the other is terrible. And then they got the one, and that kind of turns into a back and forth. When a third party comes in, it's not that we're here to be your counselor, but I've always said that probably 80% of my job is more psychology than anything else. It's getting you to feel like you can have the conversation, you can walk through this, and then get to a place where your comfort level is dialed in. And now you just move forward, because now it's not an argument about, do we pay off the house? Do we refi it? Do we stay in this house? We come up with like, well, what makes financial sense? And then we come up with a plan. So of course, gathering your info, we specifically really think your advisor, whoever you're working with, should be helping you gather this. Like we were talking about before, you should not be calling your HR benefits department on your own with some person on the other end of the line that, quite frankly, is usually going through a flip chart, and they're working with multiple companies. They don't understand your company like they probably should. So you need an advocate that's going to help bridge that knowledge for you. So that's how we tend to think of ourselves. So you should look for that in a planner. Is, do you work with companies? Do you read the summary plan descriptions, which you may see when you're clicking around on your website, this SPD retirement or health benefits? We read all that. And in that way, when we call your benefits department, we can really make sure we get everything we need and you're not missing things. Same with social. We can help kind of queue up that conversation or even get on the call with you to go through Social Security. So the whole idea behind a financial planner is they're part of that process. They shouldn't be just saying to you, hey, call me when your check arrives. Okay, that's not how it works. You've got to have everything in place. Failing to plan is planning to fail. We've all heard this. The cash flow analysis is really critical because I always joke, if you think about your financial future, a lot of people do napkin planning or yellow pad planning, as we call it. And a common thing is people say, well, I make $100,000 a year and I have $700,000. I'll be out of money in 8 years if I'm lucky, right? That's not a plan. And I can tell you right now, if everybody did that, no one would ever retire because the numbers never work out that way. You have to look at all these moving parts, inflation, Social Security, what's the interest rate to expect earning on your money? Is your mortgage going to end? Your kids might finally move out one day and you don't have to pay for them, okay? I always joke, do you have kids? And then they're like, yes. Are they living back at home? Because that's right. So we want to plan for all that. And that cash flow is critical because it's going to change. I'm going to give you the perfect plan and hand it to you and say, here you go. And the second you step out the door, it's already starting to not become accurate. So a cash flow analysis, like I said, it's a living, breathing thing. This is something that's ongoing. You have to keep updating. And that's really, the best way to answer is how much longer do you need to work or can you leave now? So that question is, when's the best time to go? It's just numbers, but you've got to have a plan to help you see that.
All right, I think we have time for questions now, and let me queue up some of these questions that we've had. Can you talk a little bit about if a financial advisor can help you calculate, say, Social Security benefits? And now we've talked a little bit about, the company benefits, but what about for Social Security?
Yeah, so when we use eMoney as a plan, if you have your recent, tax statements or know what you made the previous year for you and your spouse, whether your spouse worked or not, when we plug all that in, it's going to give us an estimate that's pretty darn close. Okay, I wouldn't bank on it down to the dollar, but within a couple $100 either way. And then if you want to go deeper, we can help you get online and go to social and look it up. I know they don't mail statements out as often as they used to, but we can definitely help with that.
Here's another question. Is there like an ideal age or perfect years of service that people should aim for to retire?
Yeah, we get this all the time. Like, how do you figure out the perfect time frame? And this kind of comes down to the company you specifically work for. So that's something where you want to be careful about listening to colleagues because you'll hear colleagues that'll tell you, you got to hit your 30 years. You got to be 55. You have to be 59 and a half. There's all these different things that people hear and then they kind of lock it in and then they focus on that. So the best thing to do is have a conversation with a professional like us that knows your plan or could look it up. And then we can help pinpoint how to maximize it. But like I was kind of saying earlier, once you've maxed out your plan on a certain level, one of the things we always talk to people about is like, well, what are your raises looking like? Are you expecting some huge raise and you're going to suddenly make double? If you're just kind of plugging along and getting your typical raise every year, once you've kind of met those certain parameters, we often see people max out as early as 50 and even 55. Some companies really do have it set up to where it'll max out at 65. But then the question is, what other things are you losing by staying till 65? So there's a couple of moving parts to that. So it's hard to answer. And that's where I would just say, be careful of people trying to pigeonhole you into what they think is right. Really do your research and talk to someone that can help you pinpoint it.
Thank you. What about a pension from a previous job? What's the strategy for that? A lot of people don't stay at one company for their entire career.
Right. So depending on your situation, we find this quite often where people will have retired or left a job, that's like when I say you transitioned, you went from company ABC to, whatever. And now you've got a pension there behind. The question is that pension portable now? Where a lot of people kind of get stuck is the pension could be taken, but because they're told by the benefits department that it's going to be, let's say it was 100,000 now and they're 50, and at 65 it'll be 140,000. So a lot of people will make the mistake and say, well, I'm going to wait till 65 to get 140. Well, let's just do some quick math. If you're 50 and you walked out with 100 today that was tax deferred growth and you weren't going to pay any taxes on it, which is what those plans typically are, you could probably double your money once or twice by the time you're 65. Meaning you could have somewhere between, of course, I can never guarantee anything. I have to asterisk everything, but you could have somewhere between $200,000 to $400,000 by the time you're 65. Even using a bond portfolio with guaranteed returns, you could do much better than what most people would see letting it sit behind. And that also goes into the same thread this is something I always tell my clients, tell your kids, pay attention to it yourself. When you've left jobs and you have this 401k behind, you don't leave them there. Ultimately, what you want to do is open an IRA and you move all those 401ks into one account. The IRA is kind of the bucket that everything's supposed to end up in. You don't want to have 401ks all over the place. Unless it's at the current company and you're really trying to target that post-55 withdrawal. But even then, there's different pieces to that too. But so for the pension and the 401k, you could definitely collect those and invest them and get someone to help you.
When is the ideal time to start talking to an advisor about retirement? So I know that some advisors won't work with certain people depending on the amount of assets they have. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about, when is a really good time to get this plan put together?
That's a really good question. When you're 16 would be the ideal time, okay? Before you completely started forming horrible habits. Here's how I would think about it. Everything else we do in life, we study for and learn when we're young. The things we don't do is learn how to raise kids, how to invest our money, how to stay married. Those are the things we don't learn. We have to figure this out somehow, right? So what I always try to encourage people is, look, the sooner you start having this conversation to figure out what is it I should be doing from the day I start working to get on the right path. Because as we go back to that slide from before, planning, having no plan is planning to fail, right? You've got to have a plan from the start so that you're maximizing things. So many people I talk to don't realize, and what I get all the time is, this is the most common thing I hear. I wish I had talked to you 20 years ago. If I had $1 for every time I've heard that. So that should be like a really good clue for anybody. If you're talking to an advisor that won't talk to you, or you simply don't have enough, that's not the right advisor. They're probably not a good fit for you. We will help anybody. I encourage my clients, have your kids call me and bug me. I will pound them in the head for a couple of minutes, information, so that they have a good start and they know what they should be doing. Because, Google's great, but I always tell people this one thing. There is not one thing that I offer clients in way of product, investment choices, whether it's bonds, stocks, mutual funds, annuities, structured products. There's not one thing that you will not find articles loving it and articles ripping it to shreds. So how do you, as a normal person trying to get through life, differentiate all this information? And so then you have people on TV telling you you shouldn't pay for help. Well, I think if you really understood whether you're in the most cost-effective 401k or working with an advisor, the costs really aren't as different as most people, I think. And I think what's more likely is the mistakes people make can be very costly. And that's that really seeing the forest for the trees, of really understanding is how do you get to a better place 10, 15, 20 years down the line? And so that's a long answer, I know, Marche, but I think it's so important because people are scared of financial advisors. They don't want to have the conversation. They're either we find they're either humiliated because they don't think they have enough, they're scared, they don't think that they're worth our time, or they think that they're going to have to spend all this money to talk to them. None of those are true. I have never had a client come back to me and say, Sean, I've been working with you for 10 years. You're too expensive. I didn't get anything out of it. I wish I never met you. Never had that conversation. I don't think most advisors do. Some are better than others, but hopefully that's a good enough answer for that.
Well, I really appreciate that. We did have a couple more questions that we weren't able to get to, but we're reaching the end of our time here. I will make sure that someone reaches out to these other people who have had questions that don't really fit with our topic today, and we will get those addressed. I want to thank Sean for being here today. What a fun, interesting webinar, really great content. I really appreciate your expertise here today. So I want to remind folks that you will be receiving a replay link to this webinar to your email, so look for that soon. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for you, your life, and your financial questions. And our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. So find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. So once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you, Sean, for being here. Thank you to our attendees, and we will see you at another webinar soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.